21. And in Timmins at this hour, it's minus 22 with a wind chill of minus 23. But the coldest spot in Ontario at this hour, Kirkland Lake, clocking in at minus 31.7 degrees. Coming up in this half hour of the show, Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine has ripped apart people's lives and communities. We're going to hear the stories of two journalists, both mothers, as they reflect on the past year. That story coming up to you in just a few minutes. But first, let's check in with what our newsroom is following today with Sarah McMillan. Hello again, Sarah.
Good morning, Hallie. Well, a visually impaired Toronto woman is speaking out about what she says is unfair treatment of people with disabilities when they fly. She says she recently had a terrible experience when traveling from Arizona. And proof that giving back knows no age limit. A 101-year-old woman from Guelph is raising money today by walking 2 kilometers for this year's coldest night of the year fundraiser. Well, those stories and more coming up in the regional news.
Sarah, earlier on the show, we were talking about things lost and found. You were telling us about how your student card was located and returned to you. We asked listeners to weigh in. Kim writes, my son was a university student, went to Montreal for New Year's Eve, lost his wallet. Driver's license, credit card, bank card, health card, student card, and cash. He called when he got home and we canceled the credit card, but about a week later, his wallet arrived in the mail. A post person or a letter carrier had found it in the snow and mailed it back with everything intact. There are good people out there. Great show. Thanks very much, Kim. And Mike sent us an email. I once lost my cell phone on the subway in Toronto. A group of friends found it, and with my battery level low, they went through my contacts one by one until they were able to reach someone who contacted me through my girlfriend's phone. I arranged to meet up with them at a pub where they gave it back to me. Love those happy news stories, Mike, especially from someone like me who regularly has to phone her phone, confine her phone. Encouraging listeners to share their stories, shoot us an email, freshair@cbc. Thanks very much, Sarah.
You're welcome.
Sarah McMillan will be back at 7:30 with the regional news. Here's Jill Barber with a song called Helium from her just-released album, Homemaker. filmmaker. That was Jill Barber with a song called Helium. You're listening to Fresh Air in Ontario, 97.5 FM in Windsor and 88.7 FM in Tillsonburg. It's been 1 year since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, as Russian tanks moved towards Kiev across the winter snow last February 24th. The lives of millions of people were about to change forever. Among them, 2 women, Ukrainian filmmaker Zhana Dovich in Kiev and Alexandra Srividova, a writer who spent most of her adult life in Moscow before emigrating to the U.S. after the fall of the Soviet Union. CBC producer Jennifer Clibben has interviewed them throughout the war, and she joined me earlier to share their stories.
Good morning.
What's the story of how you came to meet these 2 journalists?
After the invasion, I was looking for freelancers, and through another acquaintance, Zhana Dovich's name was passed on to me. We met on the phone. She's a filmmaker based in Kiev, documenting Russian war crimes, and she was keen to work on CBC Radio, and she's been covering the war for us ever since. Alexandra Sviridova, otherwise known as Sasha, is 72 now. She lives in New York City, but before that was born in Kherson, Ukraine, and then went to Moscow as a young adult and worked there throughout the Gorbachev and Yeltsin years, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and left the country in '93 to get her pre-teenage son out of the country because she was worried about military conscription, and I've known her since the 80s.
Wow. You must have been so worried about her, so concerned as events started to roll out, the full-scale invasion 1 year ago.
Yes, they both had, the 2 women had very different responses. For Zhana, who is she's in her 30s, she's very practical, she has 3 kids, she's very positive for the sake of the kids, and she had a response that reflects her character. Let's have a listen.
This day started to me very early when my son called to me, and me and my husband, we woke up at 4:30, and Ilya told us that Russia invaded Ukraine. The first explosions in Kiev were very close to his apartment. My oldest son came to us. We have 3 children, and so we spent maybe an hour at home to collect some clothes. I started to call to my friends in Western Ukraine to find any more safe place than Kiev. And many people decided to do the same, but mostly they used the way from Kiev to Lviv and to close the Polish border, and it was a huge traffic jam.
She's talking there about the mad rush for the border after the invasion. You probably remember the images of that.
I've seen them. Incredible. And what struck me, even just yesterday, I saw some images of this, is how relatively orderly it was, for the incredible numbers of people that were trying to get out.
So she tried to circumvent that traffic jam, and she and her husband went close to the Romanian border, where they holed up in a little country house with no running water, and she started her work as a war correspondent, tapping out on a computer, and she would send me photos about how she would use for a crate for a desk. Sasha, or Alexander's response was deeply emotional, and the reason being that her parents had witnessed the invasion of the Nazis in Ukraine. It triggered a lot of traumatic memories from her time of Soviet repression, living under Soviet rule, even though she was watching from New York City. And she and I were on the phone the night of the invasion. Let's listen to what she says.
At the beginning, I can only cry because I saw how people on tanks came to my land, to my house, to my city, where I grown up, where I still have friends, where I still have graves of my parents, and they're coming for what? For nothing, to kill. For what reason? Only because they have some crazy idea about Soviet Union.
That's difficult to hear how absolutely crushing it would be to see those images as she was describing. What about Zhana Dovich's life and how her family's life has changed?
Well, you can imagine she was a mom of 3, living a middle-class life. In a day, her life changed, and she had to improvise. So she moved her 3 kids to Spain, where they found themselves an apartment and now live on their own. The youngest is 10. She lives in Kiev, reporting on the war, and when she visits when she can to check in on them. And her husband, like all men over the age of 18, are involved in the war effort and cannot leave the country. But let's listen to her in her unflappable way as she explains it.
My husband is staying in Ukraine, children are abroad, and I'm like sitting on 2 chairs. Before, I haven't seen them for 3 months. My younger child, she's 10 years, and I have a son who is 16 and son who is 23, so for adult boy it's okay, but for teenagers, for like younger children, it's not normal to stay without parents and to not to see father for already for 10 months.
So Jana was a stay-at-home mom and a filmmaker, and now she's a war correspondent. And she said goodbye to her friends, many of them women, who have signed up to fight on the front lines. These are professional soldiers. They're artists, TV producers, teachers, and architects. But she wants to bear witness, and so she has been to the formerly occupied areas. Let's listen to what she describes.
We came to Irpin and Bucha. We shot photos and I talked to people, to aged people, vulnerable people who are alone. All these things that they told me, even now, it's very difficult to them, even to talk about what was their experience in March, in time of occupation, and how they tried to flee away, and it was terrible, and they saw so many deaths and all these explosions, and as well they had experience to live in Soviet Union, where it was ideology as all nations are friends and so on. It was collapse of all their previous life somehow. Yeah.
You know, Jennifer, we really know so little about true public opinion in Russia to the war because of the clampdown on free speech. What does Alexandra Sasha, she's known as, what does she say about the lack of any clear, strong opposition there to the war?
As long as I've known Sasha, she's been an outspoken freethinker, and that got her into trouble in the former Soviet Union. It is very difficult for her to accept the passivity that she sees, and it's made her deeply pessimistic about Russia. But as always, she says it best. Let's listen.
You know, you lived in Moscow, you know that major leaders of opposition, they dead, they've been killed. All others, next generation, arrested, they are in prison. All our hope always been mothers who has to care about their kids, for their sons. Right now, even mothers quiet. This is the biggest mystery for me. Ukrainians show how these prisoners of the war calling and say, Mama, please, can we do something? And Mama do nothing. What happened was this population. You know, this is slaves, and they always believe that somebody, some father, Lenin, Stalin, some father sitting in Kremlin and thinking about them, and he knows better.
You know, we're marking the year of the full-scale invasion into Ukraine. I'm wondering, how do these women see a path forward? How do they see the war developing? Do they see any resolution? What do they see?
Jana has youthful energy to her advantage, and she says there's no other way forward than to fight and win. There's no going back. There's a resoluteness to her, to the way she speaks. Let's hear what she says.
We feel this war as the last war, yes, and we have to be winners, not victims anymore. And I feel us much more united as before.
Sasha bears the weight of history in her own response. Again, she lived through the years of the Soviet Union. She knows that wars do not resolve themselves easily. There's no easy end to this conflict. Let's listen to what she has to say.
I do not see the end of this war. We have thousands dead people, thousands of people who emigrate, who lose their houses in Ukraine. We have no idea what's going on inside Russia. And we can talk today only about moment when the killing will stop, when it will be not so bloody, or maybe they will stop it this year to kill each other. But I don't believe in any diplomacy, in any real victory, because it's a huge tragedy for the next, I think, 25 years.
It's powerful and disturbing perspective there. Jennifer, thank you so much for bringing these women's voices to our show this morning.
Thank you so much.
That was the CBC's Jennifer Cliven speaking about her work with Alexandra Spuridova, a journalist born in Kherson who lived many years in Moscow and is now settled in New York, and Zhana Dovich, a broadcast journalist and filmmaker who's been chronicling the war based in Kiev. You're listening to Fresh Air on CBC Radio 1. I'm Pally Cotton. Coming up shortly, the 7:30 regional news with Sarah McMillan. But first, hip-hop artist K.O., originally from the Caribbean island of St. Lucia, here he is with an Island Tuna remix of Skip Marley's song, Slow Down.
Earlier on Friday, Trudeau said the Canadian government is providing Ukraine with military aid, bringing Canada's contribution to 8 tanks. Canada will also donate an armored recovery vehicle and more than 5,000 rounds of ammunition. School boards around the province say they have too many half-empty schools. They're calling on the Ford government to lift a ban on school closures that's been in place for nearly 6 years. CBC Queen's Park reporter Mike Crawley has the story.
Back in 2017, the then Liberal government of Kathleen Wynne brought in a moratorium on school closures. Although Premier Doug Ford has reversed many of Wynne's policies, he hasn't touched this one.
Listen, I've had sleepless nights over school closures.
Kathy Abraham is president of the Ontario Public School Boards Association, representing more than 30 boards with 1.3 million students. Abraham wants the province to give trustees back the power to merge schools with low enrollment.
The bottom line is what's good for kids and what's good for their education. You sometimes have to make difficult decisions.
Boards around Ontario have compiled lists of schools that are half empty. It's even the case in Toronto. Rachel Chernos-Lynn chairs the Toronto District School Board.
When we have shifting populations and we end up having some schools that are, underutilized and others that are bursting at the seam, we need to be able to right-size those schools, and sometimes that means consolidating schools or school closure.
In a statement, the spokesperson for Education Minister Stephen Lecce said, quote, "We're not closing schools." Mike Crawley, CBC News, Toronto.
A Toronto woman who is visually impaired is speaking out about what she says is the unfair treatment of people with disabilities when they fly. Georgia Pike says it took Air Canada staff an hour and a half to bring her and her seeing eye dog to the departure gate in Phoenix on January 31st. After being the last passenger to deplane in Toronto, Pike says she again had to wait and says airline staff made disrespectful comments.
I don't think it's fair for disabled people to have to wait until the last minute to be able to be taken through and put on a plane. It's like, okay, you are our last priority, and we are going to do the bare minimum to get you to your gate.
Air Canada says it's reviewing the matter, adding it's committed to providing accessible transportation for all customers. The Canadian Transportation Agency is also looking into what happened. And finally, a 101-year-old woman from Guelph is raising money today by walking 2 kilometers for this year's Coldest Night of the Year fundraiser. Orpha Thrasher says she walks every day to keep herself in shape.
It's addictive, actually, and as long as my knees and my hips act all right, I intend to do it for as long as I can.
Thrasher raised $22,000 last year for people experiencing hunger and homelessness, and is hoping to raise thousands more during today's event. And that is your CBC News to 7:34. I'm Sarah McMillan. The forecast for Toronto, Hamilton, Niagara, cloudy today with flurries ending this afternoon. Expect 5 centimeters of snow today and a high of -2. Tonight, cloudy, a low of -3, and tomorrow, cloudy with a high of +3. And in Peterborough and the Kawarthas, mainly cloudy today, periods of light snow ending this afternoon, a high of -6. Tonight, cloudy, a low of -11, and tomorrow, a chance of flurries, a high of +1. You're listening to CBC Radio 199.1 FM in Toronto.
This is Fresh Air on Saturday, February the 25th. I'm Allie Codden. Time is 7:35, an hour earlier in the Central Time Zone. Coming up in this half hour, 'tis the season for winter festivals. In addition to sleigh rides and hot chocolate, we'll hear about a unique attraction at the Dwight Winter Carnival, where visitors can experience a getaway with goats, also known as a goat-away. Right now, John Northcott joins me now with a sneak peek at the headlines on Goat Report. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Allie. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you doing?
Well, busy as always, and busier, arguably, for our colleagues who are in the field. Murray Brewster's in Ukraine, and the day after the world marked the first year of the Russian invasion there, he's going to tell us, going forward, what the concerns are and some of the larger geopolitical implications of all of this. Bird flu being watched very carefully in the UK. Our Dominic Politis is watching that. Officials there, they're worried. Bird flu, arguably, you could catch it from a bird, but could it be passed from human to human? And of course, that is a great concern around the world, but the British focusing on that, and Dom will have that story for us as well. And in Nigeria, we're watching a bit of an election that is also a generational sea change. There are 19 candidates running, but a lot of young people involved in the campaign, so we'll take you to Nigeria as well for all of that.
John, I don't know if you were listening earlier, but Sarah and I were talking about things that have been lost and found. I shared the story of my 13-year-old twins. They've lost violas. They've lost their wallet.
Violas? They weren't Stradivari, were they?
No, not at all. No. Both of these losses involved public transit in Ottawa, but both have been returned. And just yesterday we picked up the wallet. All the cash that was in it still there. All the gift cards still there. We're so grateful to some good Samaritan for handing it in. We have no way of knowing who did it, and I just wanted to thank folks for being that person that returns it. We've been sharing some emails from listeners. People can join in the conversation at freshair@cbc.ca. Here's one from PK of Burlington who writes, I lost my watch after having my first baby. It was special to me, so I kept hoping it would turn out. 2 years later, I had my second baby. And when we got the car seat back out to bring her home from hospital, I found my watch in that little compartment in the back of the seat. Happy day indeed. Have you ever lost something, John, and found it again?
Things do turn up now and again, but what struck me as I listened to various lost and found stories was about my grandmother. And to put this in perspective, everyone seems to marry late in my family, so there's this sort of generational skip. So my grandmother was a Victorian. She was born in the Victorian era, and not a lot of money in those days. And in the Depression, her husband, my grandfather, was a police officer, and she was on. They got away for a week, and they rented a cottage. And this was, of course, a huge deal. Long before people rented places willy-nilly, it was you'd think and save and reserve it a year ahead. Stay at this cottage. It was in the summer, and sitting outside, lovely summer. And then later she realized the diamond had fallen out of her engagement ring.
Oh,
exactly. Devastating. I mean, this was a woman, I referenced the Victorian aspect because very frugal. I mean, she'd get upset if you played cards on Sunday. So to lose, that would be her only luxury. She wore no other jewelry, and to lose that diamond, just devastated. So, you get over it because it's gone. And the next summer, they rented the same cottage for a week, and she's sitting in a chair again outside, and she sees a little glint in the grass.
No.
Yes, and it was the diamond.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so that has become sort of legendary in my family in terms of not necessarily the ultimate lost and found, but pretty close.
I have to tell you, my husband a few years ago, he lost a bit of weight. I think that may have led to what
He didn't find it again, did he? Is that where the story's headed?
That's a whole other story. That's a whole other call-in. He was playing with the kids in the park in the wintertime, and when he got back from playing in the park, he took off his mittens, and his wedding band was gone. And we looked high and low.
Mm-hmm.
We looked in the park where he'd been playing in the snow, couldn't find it. Months passed. There's a ring at the doorbell. It's our neighbor. Is this yours? In his palm, the ring. His dog had been snuffling at sort of the melting snow not far from our house, and my neighbor looked down to where his dog was snuffling. What is it that my dog has found? He says. He looks a little closer. A perfect ring shape in the snow. Digs it up. There it is, the ring. And I had been complaining about this on the morning show, and so it sort of was
pays to advertise, doesn't it?
And there it was, months later, 4 or 5 months after we lost it, we found it again. The funny thing is, the inscription on the wedding band, "Oh, the places we'll go," that was on it.
The ring took it seriously, too.
Yes. John, listen, thank you very much for sharing the story. We're interested in listeners' stories of things lost and found, obviously things that mean something or significant in some way. Freshair@cbc.ca. That's how people can get in touch. Thanks very much, John.
All the best, Helen.
John Northgott will be back at 8 o'clock with World Report. Begonia is on tour right now. We're going to give you some dates after this song. Here is Begonia with Right Here.
But then again, what as far as you think, whenever you go out
That's right here from Begonia's album Powder Blue. She plays at Mills Hardware in Hamilton tonight, and she heads to Club Saw in Ottawa on Tuesday.